Okay, good morning. So we are doing today Taanit in Chesam and Aleph. Which we'll finish the parak on Monday. Um, so where we were was at the two dots on your diagram base. We're discussing now the next part of the Mishnah, which deals with Megillas Taanit. I really wanted to spend some time discussing a little bit more on the Gemara yesterday. This idea of divrei Torah and divrei Kabbalah is uh, not to be learned. Right? We learn things out of Torah Moshe. We don't learn things out of different Nevi'im. And the Gemara um, seems to say that as a principle. And the question is whether or not that principle is always upheld. For example, over here we had something that we learned from Yecheskel, and the Gemara was like, "Really? Do we learn this out from Yecheskel? Don't we normally say Devar Torah Teres Moshe L'Man Divrei Kabbalah Manu? Isn't that going to present an issue of Divrei Torah Divrei Nevi'im? Is not something that we do." So the Gemara says, no, actually it was Gemara Gemiri law, and instead we have a tradition, and Yechezkel came along and made a smichus, and he tied it into something, but it was really a tradition. The tradition was much older. So the Marzchias in this sefer, the sefer called Teres Nevi'im, and this sefer Teres Nevi'im, he goes through Gehenna v'Gehenna examples of things that would seem to be that we did not learn it out from the Psukim. We learn it out from seems to be Nevi'im, and in fact, do we always say that there's a earlier tradition that lists before? But we don't have the time really to go through it in more detail. So
The first there showed that we brought down the Sefer, right?
That was.
Looking at like from Sukkim and Iyad.
Yeah, but that was about Gevuras Kasham. You mean Gevuras Kasham? Yeah, but not really. That's not. I mean, sure, that was definitely Xer that was brought down from the VM, but that's not really the kind of halakha that we're dealing with. That was the question. Like in the davening that we say Mashabrach, Morna Geshem, we say Mchal Chaim Chesed, Chaim Esem Rachmam, Shemalev, Merkron. We talk about the Gevuras Gesham that Hashem is the power of the rain. We Yeah, that's not the halach. The halach is not being created from the Navi. The question is how do you refer to it? You refer to this askara of the rain with Mashav Arucham or Geshem, right? Hashem moves the winds and brings the rain. There's a certain element of gevurais there, but I don't view that in the same way as like the institution of, let's say, Purim, Hanukkah, right? So Hanukkah we don't really have because Antiochus or whatever, but Purim is like a whole new yantif created not in the Torah, created in the Ksuvim, in Esther, on the Chamish Megillas. So over there you have a whole Bavli, Yerushalmi, different understandings of how could it be. That's the most not egregious. I don't want to use that word, but the most blatant example of something that's created later than the Chumash. But there are others. There's lots of Hilchos Shabbos that we learn out from Yecheskel. Learn the laws of Beis Hamikdash of Kahanim. It's simply not in the Chumash, and the question is whether or not that can become halachas, binding halachas or not. And oftentimes you find in Shas that you have situations like over here where it's like, no, it's not really learned out from her. Actually, it's earlier, but we come along and have a smichus in the pasuk, but it's not fundamental to learn that of the pasuk in the Nevi'im. And that's what the Sefer Teres Nevi'im Maratskias goes to, is to try to make an actual lishitase kind of an idea through Shas to see if it upholds. All right, but we don't have any more time for now, so I'm just putting it out there as a Sefer. Again, something to look into another time. For our purposes now, we have to talk about Megillas Taanit. Megillas Taanit is talked about in Shas in a couple of places. One is the Gemara Shabbos Shid Gimel. The Gemara Shabbos Shid Gimel tells us there in the Mishnah about Hanani and Chizkiah, what they did in his attic, You look in Shas, there's a few places that talks about different people's attics. This is the attic of Hanani ben Chizkiah. And in his attic, they learned, the Gemara ends up saying, that's the Mishnah, and then the Gemara ends up learning out that what do they learn in Hanani ben Chizkiah's attic? They learned there about Megillas Tainus. They learned the Megillas Tainus. Happens to be there's a line there. There's a Gamliel says that if you would do like because what's so special about Megillas Tainus? I should mention this. I think I said this already before. Megillas Tainus comes to us basically in two parts. Right, there's the actual, considered to be the older part of the Megillas Tainus, which is days that are holidays, and it's usher to have a Tainus. And the second part of Megillas Tainus, which is days that it's usher to have parties. It's really you should be fasting because the days that we had tzaras. As I said, most of those days, even if it's brought down Shulchan Aruch, we don't do. For example, in the second part of Megillas Tainus, it's brought down the 8th, 9th, and 10th day of Tevis, we fasting. All right, because of various things that happen. But I haven't met anybody that fasts on the 8th or the 9th, right? Only they fast on the 10th. Okay. But we're focusing not on the second part of Megillas Tainus, we're focusing on the first part, right? They're considered to be the oldest part of Megillas Tainus. The first that was written down of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that is the list of days where it's usher to fast. Why? Because it's a big holiday on those days. And we're going to go through now some of the list of holidays. So that's one Gemara there. And so I should mention that over there, the Gemara Shabbos and Gimel. So over there, the Gemara says that I think it's Shimon Gamliel or Shimon Gamliel says that what was so special about the people who wrote Megillas Tainus? That they were machavim the tzaras of the Yidden, right? The Jewish people had various problems, and what's the Jewish approach is we survived, right? We were threatened, we survived, so we eat, right? That's the general idea. So that's why you're not allowed to fast on those days. So the Gemara calls them mechavim tzaras. They really appreciated the tzaras of the Jewish people, and therefore when they got out of it, they wanted to celebrate. So Gamliel says we're also mechavim tzaras, but if we actually did a calendar where every time we survived the tzara, we wouldn't be able to fast. We would have to eat. Then we have no days that we're allowed to fast because there's so many tzaras that we have that we've been able to get out of. That's the Gemara there in Shabbos. Our Gemara today is not really going with the Gemara in Shabbos so much in that sense, but it's really going more with the Gemara in Menachos. Menachos and Samachay, the Gemara there deals with the back and the forth on the some of the days and what the arguments were. We're not going to see the arguments in detail over here as much as it says in Menachos, but we'll go through the outside a little bit of them. All right, so that's the background. So the Gemara, the two dots. Call a custom Megillas Tainus come from the Mishnah. Call a custom Megillas Tainus loyal misped lefanav. I'm sorry. Call a custom Megillas Tainus loyal misped. Anything that says Megillas Tainus, you're not allowed to have any mourning. Lefanav also achar mutter. According to the Tanakhama, at least, the day before was also aser, and the day after was mutter. Rabbi Yossi says no, and the Mishnah says the day before and the day after both are aser. Nothing more. And the rabbis taught as follows. Ilin Yamin, this is again from Megillas Tainus. These are the days are usher to fast. And on some days it says that it's not only usher to fast, but it's usher to have a hesped. Rashi explains back in the Mishnah that on the lower level, right, it's usher to fast. On the higher level, it's not only usher to fast, but some of the days are also usher to even have a hesped. Somebody passes away, you can't have a hesped on that day. So the Gemara now quotes from Megillas Tainus, the first and Megillas Tainus works this way. It doesn't work in chronological order. It works in calendar order. In other words, Megillas Tainus goes through the month of Nisan, Tishrei, and I think there's like 35 or so odd in that first part of days that it's also to fast and to mourn. I think there's 35 or so days going through the calendar from the Nisan, etc. Not in terms of the chronology of when these fights happen. So as we will see today, fight that happened during the times of Rechem and Zakkai. So again, that's around the time of the second, the end of the second bias. But some of the days happened much earlier than that. Happened still in the middle of the second bias, like when the Romans were coming in. So, I mean, 50 or 100 years earlier. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is becoming the Nazi at the end of the second bias when it's destroyed, and afterwards when it's in Yavna. So that's like the 60s of the Common Era, 70s of the Common Era. That time, that's Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's time. We have some of these days. Again, we're not going to mention them here today, but some of the days in Megillus Taanit are earlier than that. So it's an era. So exactly when it was written, not 100% clear to me exactly, because it certainly includes some later days. All right. Anyhow, so for our purposes now, so the Gemara says as follows. So Alan Yom Loyles Anah behind, Umaksas and Loyles Spade behind. Some days you can't fast, some days you can't give a hesped. Right? Eat not just fast, not fasting, you can't even give a hesped. So says the Gemara. Meresh Yarcha de Nisan Va'ad Tamnaya Bay. Again, this is still quoting from Megillus Taanit. Right? You notice a different Aramaic, right? This is like the Aramaic from Eretz Yisrael, not from Babel. So Meresh Yarcha de Nisan Va'ad Tamnaya Bay, from the beginning of the month of Nisan until the 8th day of Nisan, he took him to Mida, the loyal is paid behind. Right? They were able to make the carbon tambid uh, into a halacha that can be acceptable for the Perushim, for the rabbis, and therefore they decided the loyal is paid behind no fasting and no mourning during those days. And mitamnaya be ad soif ma'adaya, and from the 8th day of Nisan until the end of Pesach, a tais of Chaga de Shavuaya, they were able to solidify the Chag of Shavuos, the loyal is paid behind. That you can't have not only no fasting on those days, but you can't even have any hespedim on those days. That's how important these holidays were. And so now the Gemara explains what exactly do we mean. So Amar Maresh Yarcha de Nisan ad Tamnaya Bay, from the beginning of the month of Nisan until the 8th day. So you take him to Midah. They were able to solidify the carbon tamid. The loyal is paid, right? That not only don't you not fast, but you also don't even have a hesped. So why is that? So the Gemara Menachos gives more of an explanation than we see over here. Rashi brings down part of it. Okay, so another parish in says brings down literally Rashi. I'll just basically tell you what it says outside and what the Gemara over there says in Menachos. So it happens like this. Um, there was a debate, right? Sessus points out there was a debate. The Tzdukim, Rashi says, Baitusim, whichever, it doesn't make a difference. Tzaddik and Baitus, they were both sort of on the same page in the sense that they were denying the Teresh Baal Peh, and they had various opinions. Among the things that they denied, of course, we'll see in a moment, in terms of when Shavuos comes out, when you bring the carbon Aimer. We'll see that in a second. But they had another debate, and this is the debate of the 1st of Nisan until the 8th day, and that is who is able to be responsible for bringing the carbon tamid. So, according to Tzaddik and Baitos, even a yachid is able to be misnad of a carbon tamid. Why, says Taisus? Mishum d'chsev, the pasuk says it's a keves echad tasa b'boiger, ve'is a keves hashem tasa ben rabbayim. And if you look at the lashon, it's a keves echad tasa, that's not mashma that it's talking about a tzibur. It's mashma even a yachid. So that is to say, let's say you have a rich guy, he wants to make a donation. He comes to Mr. Mikdash, says, "Here's $100. I want you to buy a goat for the carbon tamid." Are you allowed to take that $100 and use it to buy a carbon that's going to be used for the carbon tamid? According to Tzaddik and Baitis, yes. According to Chacham, no. Why? Because the Chacham say, no, look at the pasuk. The carboni lachmi liishai reach michaychi tishmeru v'hakiv li mo'adoi. What is liishai? Liishai is mashma plural. So therefore, for the Chachamim, the only way you can do a carbon tamid is from the lishka. Right? That's the Mishnah there in the Mishkalim. They had three different lishkas, and they would collect money for different things that were public needs. One of the things that's a public need is the carbon Talmud. How does the carbon Talmud get paid? Right? Who's paying? There's no you can't have a sign on the billboard in the Beis Hamikdash sponsored today by this family. It's not going to happen for the carbon Talmud. The carbon Talmud is sponsored by the Jewish people. Right? That's when they would collect the money for the various different lishkas. One of them was for the carbon tzibur. The carbon Talmud has to come from the tzibur, cannot come from a yachid. A yachid, no matter how much he wants to be misnad, cannot be misnad of it. So this was a debate that happened in the times of Tzaddik and Baitas. We're going back now to the times of the Beis Hamikdash. How it happened, they had a debate in the second Beis Hamikdash about the carbon Talmud. It wasn't resolved already by the first Beis Hamikdash. I'm not really know, but they had a whole debate. And the rabbis went out over Tzaddik and Baitos. They went over the Tzaddik and Baitusim. And the carbon Talmud is then definitively decided that it's all, I should point out, like historically, we think, historians say, that the rabbis controlled sort of Eretz Yisrael. In other words, the Sanhedrin controlled what was going on in the land of Israel. But the Tzdukim had a big power in the Beis Hamikdash. Right? We have a bunch of Gemaras in Yuma about this. That the rabbis would try to warn them not to do the terrorists and make them swear that they were going to do everything that they said they were doing, that they taught them how to do the avodah. But there was definitely a lot of kahanim who were naita towards the tzdukim and the baitusim, but in the Beis Hamikdash there was a fear that they would do things their way. But the rabbis' control was sort of more outside of the Beis Hamikdash. In any event, once they resolved this, once they resolved this issue of the carbon Talmud only coming from the tzibur, not coming from the yachid, and they made it a holiday. They made it a yantiv. So says the Gemara now a question. Lama li mireish yarcha. The Gemara asks, why is it that we're making it a holiday from the first of Nisan until the 8th day? What's the first day of Nisan? The first day of Nisan is Rosh Chodesh. We know that Rosh Chodesh is a holiday. We just literally had in last week's parsha, right? What do we say in last week's parsha? In last week's parsha we said, "Uv'yom simchatchem u'moedechem u'roshei chodshechem." Right? Rosh Chodesh is considered like a simcha. Rosh Chodesh is a day of holiday. So if Rosh Chodesh is itself a day of holiday, then I don't need you to tell me that on a rabbinic level we're making Rosh Chodesh a day that you're not going to do mispid. Well, obviously, it's a yantif. Says the Gemara, why do you have to tell me that it's also from the first day of Nisan until the 8th day of Nisan? Lema mitrei Nisan. Tell me that it's also from the second day of Nisan. Rosh Chodesh gufe yantif uve'aser. Then I'm going to know for sure. The first day is aser because the first day is Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is aser. Every month, right? Then we have a Rosh Chodesh that comes out on Sunday. So we read the Haftarah of Machar Chodesh. What do we have? Then we have a whole story. Right? We have the whole story about David HaMelech not showing up for the special sacrifice they had for Rosh Chodesh. They had special yantif for Rosh Chodesh. And then Shaul gets very angry and he wants to kill Yonasan. Right? It's a terrible story. But what's that a situation of? That's a situation of where you see clearly that Rosh Chodesh was a holiday. So says the Gemara, why do I have to tell you that from the first day till the 8th day, it's usher to fast, usher to do a hesped? I know the first day already, because by definition it's a dairaisa, so I should just mention the second. I should say from the second till the 8th, whatever it was that they had the vikuach with the tzdukim ma'tusim. So that's the days that it's usher to have a fast. But I don't need to mention the first day. So answers the Gemara. So answers the Gemara as follows. Amar Rav lo nitzurcha el aser yom shalafanav. Rav says you're right. We don't actually need to tell you that the first day of Rosh Chodesh is Aser from the fact that they won the Tzdukim in this argument about the carbon Talmud. You're right. I know without it. But I want to Aser up even the day before Rosh Chodesh. And the day before Rosh Chodesh is not going to be Aser mitzad da'iraisa. And the fact that it's Rosh Chodesh, the day before is not going to be Aser. Only if I say the first day is us because of this newfangled holiday about beating the Tzdukim, about the carbon Talmud, will I say that Chav Tes Adar is going to be Aser as well? Now you're going to say, what? Why? If the rabbinic day is so strong that even the day before is Asr, then shouldn't the Raisa day of Rosh Chodesh make the day before Asr as well? And here we have a fundamental Gemara, which we see again throughout Shas and throughout rabbinic literature, which is Divrei Torah are not tzrichim chizuk, but the Divrei Kabbalah, the Divrei Rabbanan are tzrichim chizuk. What's that mean? It means like this: what's written in the Torah, no one's going to mess with, right? It's not. You don't need to make it stronger. The rabbis don't need to come along and give it a support. But the words of the rabbis, they need support. So therefore, we don't make the day before Rosh Chodesh Asr, but the day before this rabbinic institution, that we do make Asr. So that's how the Gemara ends up concluding. In other words, according to the way Rav is saying, Mitzad Rosh Chodesh, the first day of Nisan, I would have a situation where then the day before the last day of Adar, I would be able to fast. I would be able to give a hesped. If I want to Asr up those days, the only way to do it is by saying that the reason that it's Asr is not from the second day of Nisan, but this holiday of celebrating that we beat the Stukim about the Karban Tamid starts from the first day of Nisan. So then it's not just the regular Rosh Chodesh, but there's some rabbinic institution there as well. So then the last day of Adar is also going to become Asr as well. So the Gemara, we want to be able to answer up the day before. It says, why don't I say the day before is Asr? Because the day before a Daraisa holiday, the holiday of Rosh Chodesh. And for the Gemara, Rosh Chodesh Daraisa. Rosh Chodesh is what? Daraisa. Or Daraisa like boy chizuk, and Daraisa don't need chizuk. The Tanya, we have a brayse that teaches Hayam ha'ela ksuvim Megillas Taanit. The days that are written in Megillas Taanit. Again, whenever we say ksuvim, Megillas Taanit, a siv, Megillas Taanit, all that is because Megillas Taanit is the only thing that was written. So do we have a brayse that says Hayam ha'ela ksuvim Megillas Taanit lifneim ulachreim asurim? Right, the day before and the day after are aser. Shabbos Yom Tevim. Hein asur lifnein ulachreim mutar. Right. The days of Megillas Taanit, the day before and the day after, is also, it sounds again very much like a bitch, like we'll see. But for our purposes now, there's a difference between the days that are also from the rabbis of Megillas Taanit versus Shabbos and Yom Tovim. What about Shabbos and Yom Tov? Hein asurin. Those days themselves are asur. Again, Tanis Chalayim, whatever, we have certain exceptions. But fundamentally, Shabbos and Yom Tov is asur to do a hesped. It's asur to do a Tainus. But on Friday or on Thursday or on Sunday, right? It's mutter. There's no issue the day before, the day after when it comes to Shabbos or when it comes to Yantif. Why? What's the difference between Shabbos and Yantif and the days of the rabbis? Why are the days of the rabbis being more machmir on? Says the Gemara, Alol divrei Torah v'divrei Torah and tzrichim chizuk. Alol divrei seifrim v'divrei seifrim tzrichim chizuk. When it comes to the Rosh Chodesh, when it comes to the Shabbos, when it comes to the Yantiv, so I don't have to make the day before and the day after Asr in order to make sure that you're going to keep the holiday. You're going to keep the holiday. I'm not worried about it. But when it comes to a situation where the holiday that we're celebrating is not a Daraisa, it's not listed in the Chumash, right? It's not even listed in the Navi. It's something that the rabbis instituted because of a debate with the Tzdukim. So then you might be a little bit lax, a little bit too easygoing with regards to such an institution of such a day. So therefore, how do we ensure that you are going to, in fact, keep it seriously? We're going to make even the day before and the day after Asr and hope then that the actual day itself, you're going to keep that as well. Just mentioned that we talked about this idea. We mentioned it in Brachos as well about putting in certain gederos. So if you remember, the one of the things that we said was the idea that a person shouldn't go home. Or we're so worried about saying Krishma in the evening. We're afraid a person's going to go home and he's going to say, "I'm going to have a little bit to eat, a little bit to drink, a little bit, to relax, and then I'll go take care of my nightly obligation in terms of Shema and Shemona Esrei, etc." And what the Gemara says there on Dalam Beis, "V'chot fasei shina." When you go down to take a little bit of Isha important, I'm going to go sleep a little bit of a nap. All of a sudden, it's in the morning, and boom, you forgot. You didn't say Shema, you didn't do Shema Esrei, and you missed it. So therefore, we said over there that somebody who does this, it's chayiv mitzvah. It's chayiv misa. We wanted to use a lotion to make sure that somebody should take it seriously when he comes home. First, you go to base management. First, he finishes marriage and he does the Shema and all obligations. He learns a little bit, whatever it was, mikvah, mishnah, whatever. Then he goes home and eats and drinks and does it, and because then he can go to sleep and it won't be a problem. So the same idea. Same idea is that when it comes to the words of the rabbis, it needs more chizik. So therefore, it comes in an anonymous situation. A day that is a rabbinic institution of a holiday, which is such a minor of a minor day. The day before the day after is also asr. When it comes to Dairaisa Day, which is literally a holiday mentioned in the Chumash, the day before the day after is not a problem. Good, that's where we got to now. So at this stage of the Gemara, we understand why this holiday that is celebrating the institution of the Karban Talmud, the day before is going to be Asr, which we wouldn't know if we had not mentioned it. If we just said Rosh Chodesh, we wouldn't know about the day before at all. And that's the reason why we don't say it's also from the second day of Nisan. If we said it's only also from the second day of Nisan, the first day, of course, the also goes Rosh Chodesh, but you wouldn't know the last day of Adar. So you wouldn't give a chizuk to the words of the rabbis. Now you might say, shoulders, I understand. But maybe on this one, you don't need to give any chizuk for the words of the rabbis. Why? Because on this day, Rosh Chodesh is always going to be a daraisa. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is always going to be on a daraisa level. No one's going to ever mess around with the first day of this holiday. The first day of this holiday has a daraisa aspect. It's Rosh Chodesh. So no one's going to ever fast on it. No one's going to ever be mispaid on it. So if that's the case, maybe other days have to have chizuk. Why this one? So just start after the second day. This date doesn't need chizuk. Because no one's going to ever not mess with it. No one's ever, going to somehow mess around with it. The only thing I can think of as an answer to this is basically like, look, not every day in the 35 days, all the different months of the year are going to have it. The first day being a Rosh Chodesh. So what are you going to say? Some days, you have to know which month. This month, the first day, the day before is us, the day before, and the day after is us. But this month, no. This month, the day before is going to be a mutter because it starts out with Rosh Chodesh, but the day after is us. It gets too complicated. So I think that's the reason why you just have to do it as a loy plug. But fundamentally, based upon what we're saying, that Divrei Torah is not Tzrich and Chizuk, you really should not need a fear over here of making the day before Rosh Chodesh to be Asr, because by definition, Rosh Chodesh D'Oraisa, it's never going to be messed around with. So I do think that is something you have to add in. I didn't see that anybody says it, but partially to me, that's what you have to explain. All right, so now we explain the second part of the holiday, right? The second part of the holiday there of Nisan. Amar Mar, mitamnya be'atzef mayadaya, from the 8th day of Nisan until the end of Pesach, itais of Chagad Shvuaya, the Leilim Espei, right? We solidified the holiday of Shavuos that we don't have any haspedim on it because it's such a big holiday that we managed to win over the Tzdukim and the Baitusim, right? Everyone knows what the Machlekes was here. This is the classic Machlekes. The Tzdukim and Baitusim said, Mimachmas HaShabbos means, when do you bring the Karban Aimer? Sunday. And you count 7 weeks. So when is the Shavuos happening? Sunday. So it's always going to be a situation of that. It's always going to be Sunday. So over there, the Gemara said that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is fighting with them. That means the battle is happening already in the end of the Second Temple period, still fighting about this. So Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said to them, Shaitan, right? Rashi brings down from the Gemara Menachos, you bunch of fools. Minayin lechem, what's your source? Adam she'achzira davar chutz mizak is the first white line of the Rashis, or the really white lines all in the bottom of the page. And they're basically fighting with him until one old man said the following. Yeah, he was like the Siddish Rebbe, he was the Oyev Yisrael. Yeah. What was the Oyev Yisrael? The idea she'atzeres yom echad, and he felt bad for the Jewish people. Then that Shavuos is one day holiday. So you're like, it's early regular. Your mom should you like make yourself crazy. You go all the way to the Yerushalayim for one day. You want to make it a 2-day yontif. How do you make it a 2-day yontif? make sure that Shavuos comes out on Sunday. If Shavuos comes out on Sunday, then everybody's going to come and be able to be in Yerushalayim for 2 days, a 2 day yontif. They'll enjoy it more. I'm not sure if nowadays people would say the same, but that was the logic of this tzedugi. So I mean, when it says everybody was, the Gemara says that everybody's intimidated, no one's willing to say anything to him. Then this old man says to him this idea. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai goes crazy, and he says, "Really? That this is that? This is like now." I'm not 100% sure that the Gemara is not a polemic against the Stukim. In other words, I'm not sure that was the best argument. If we had access to Tzduki literature, I don't think that is the argument they were saying. We wanted a 2 day yontif. Moshe Rabbeinu was an Oiv Yisrael. That's the Gemara's way of putting what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was saying, and that was the machlokes. Why we're trying to make it out that they were looking like fools, right? They had a argument. If you go through Tanakh, what does Shabbos mean? What does Shabbos mean throughout Tanakh? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai has a strong argument. What does Shabbos mean throughout Tanakh against them? But that is certainly their argument. Is not because of showers and like we want to the yantif, we wanted to make it harder on ourselves, no, or in this case easier. Yeah, I don't know if people would have preferred it or not, but the way I read the Gemara is not that was their strongest argument. I read the Gemara that the Gemara is throwing into an argument that is so by definition foolish that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is going to knock it out of the park. With that said, what ends up happening is, it seems like that the Stukim end up being machniya themselves, okay, the Karban Omer is going to be brought whenever the Pesach is, right? Because think about it as the Psukim. The one pasuk says, "Svartam lechem makos Shabbos, miyom haviyach masem ratanufa sheva Shabbos is tmimus tiena." So one pasuk says you have to count sheva Shabbos is tmimus. It has to be 7 full weeks. The next pasuk says that it has to be what? Ad mimachas Shabbos hashviyis, hisbru chamishim yom. Has to be 50 days. Now, the only way to ever have Sheva Shabbos Tamimis is to have the day be a full week, which would be starting on Sunday. Right? You otherwise cannot have it. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to the Stukim, I hear you. So what about when Pesach falls out in the middle of the week? Pesach can fall out in the middle of the week. That's for sure. No one denies that. So what you're really saying then is the Pesach falls out on this day. And the Omer is brought in essentially the next day. You're saying we have to delay the Omer until Sunday. Otherwise, you can't make this work. So essentially, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's argument to the Sukkim is the only way that you're able to justify this is essentially to make this break between the Omer and the Karban Pesach, which, if you go through Am Chumash, Shabbos is used in ways that are not just Shabbos, right? Where else do we see it? Yom Kippur, right? That's another great example of a day that's called Shabbos. Doesn't mean Yom Kippur is on Shabbos. So you go through Tanakh, you'll see the word Shabbos is not always used on Shabbos. And therefore, when you look there in the Pasuk, don't read Machas Shabbos as being Shabbos. Now, the Gemara uses the word, the Sukkim uses the word Atzeres. Does Atzeres always mean Shemini Atzeres? Atzeres can mean Shavuos also. So, if you go throughout Tanakh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's fundamental argument is a very powerful one, is you can 100% see that the word Shabbos is not just used for Shabbos, and therefore it just means the day after the holiday, the day after you were Shabbos, which would be Pesach, whenever Pesach turns out to be. All right, so continuing the Gemara. The Gemara asks, so how is it that on Shavuos we end up having a situation where we had this whole battle about when you bring the Omer, when you're going to have Shavuos, and they won that battle between the 8th day of Nisan, and therefore we are not allowed to fast from the 8th day of Nisan all the way through the end of Pesach. Says the Gemara, Lema Adamoid, why do you have to say till the end of the day of Pesach? Just say until Pesach. You know that obviously Pesach is going to be Asr because Pesach is the Deraisa. Umayid Gufa Yantafu V'Asr. Amar Pavak the Amar Rav. Amar Pavak says again, like what Rav already told us before, as we turn the page to Yitchet Mouth. This whole idea is really to answer up the day before, right? So, Hakanami, the way Rav said it before, that when we wanted to talk about the first part of Nisan, that if we started off on the second day of Nisan, you wouldn't know the last day of Adar. So then we have to say the first day of Nisan to tell you even the day of last day of Adar is also Asar. So, Hakanami, we're trying to answer up Isru Chag of Pesach. And you wouldn't know Isru Chag of Pesach is Asar if you just said that it was Asar until the fast, until Pesach. So it says the word Kiman Ki Rabbi Yosi. Who's this going like? It's not mashma like this is going like Rabbi Yosi. Damar Bein Lafana Bein La'achav Aser. This is mashma like Rabbi Yosi then, who says that even the day after this rabbinic holiday is also Aser to fast. So says the Gemara. So Ihaki, if this is correct, that we're going like Rabbi Yosi, who says that the day before and the day after is Aser. So Ihaki for the Gemara Be'esim V'Tisha Nami My Arya. Why are we saying that the reason that we have to say the first day of Nisan is Asr? Why? Because we want to have the day before the last day of Adar also being Asr. And if I just started from the second day of Nisan, so the day before, which is Rosh Chodesh, which is Daraisa, I wouldn't know that the day before is Asr because the Daraisa don't need Chizuk. So says the Gemara, why do I have to have that day, the first day of Nisan listed? Let's say that the 29th day would be Asr, not because it's the day before the first day of Nisan, which doesn't just have a Daraisa issue, but also a rabbinic one. I would know it's Asr because of there's a holiday on the 28th day. One of the holidays that's listed in Adar, that it's Asr to fast on, is the 28th day of Hadar. It was a special holiday then. And if you're going with Rabbi Yossi, that means that not only is the day before going to be Asr, but also the day after is going to be Asr. So I know the 29th day is going to be Asr. So I don't need to tell you then that the first day of Nisan is the day when this holiday starts, where they figured out the carbon tumid. The year forget you the 29th day to be Asr. Because I would know the 29th day is Asr because it's the day after the 28th day. And if we're going to Rabbi Yossi, the first and the day before and the day after is Asr, so I would have already known it. Now the Gemara says, what's this holiday on the 28th day? The Tanya. Be'esem v'tamya be'as besurta toivos lihudoi. On the 28th day of Adar, a great besura tova happened to the Jews. That they don't have to stop learning Torah. Why? There was once a terrible gezerah passed on the Jews. They couldn't learn. They couldn't give us meal of Sheikhal Shabbosis. They couldn't give Shabbos Maas. Yehuda ben Shamua. What did this guy do? V'chaverev and his friends. They went to go to seek advice from a Roman matron. Some woman. Shekol Gedeli Roman Suyin. Everyone went to go talk to her. Amralam. She said, "Imdu v'efkinu b'layla." She said, "Make a hafgana at night." They made a hafgana at night. And what do they say? Amru. They like cried out, try to make the Romans feel sorry for them. Are we not brothers? Right, that reminds us of the Chumash. Kulanu b'nei ish echad nachnu. Right? When the brothers try to convince Yeshua they're not Meraglim. Are we not the sons of one father? We're not the sons of one mother. Why are you treating us worse than every other nation in the world? So Bitlam, they were mevatel gzera. And they made this day into a yantif. So now, if they made this day into a yantif, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen if this day is now a yantif, the 28th day? So now the 29th day will also be Asr. So the 29th day is Asr. Then what I have to tell you? The first day of Nisan is Asr. It's Rosh Chodesh. We said, no, that's not good enough because the day before won't be Asr. But the day before will be Asr. If you go to Rabbi Yossi and we're holding like Rabbi Yossi, then the 29th day is going to be Asr because the 28th day was a holiday. So answers, there are two answers. Either it's because it's a Chedesh Me'ubar. In other words, it's not a Chaser, it's a Me'ubar. So you have a 30th day. So if you have a 30th day, not a 29th day, so the 29th day will be Asr. But the 30th day of Adar will be Mutter. If not for the fact that the first day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan is not just Asr Midaraisa, but also Asr Midarabbanan. So that's one possible answer. The second answer, Rashi Amar Afilu Tem L'Chodesh Chaser. Rav says even Tem L'Chodesh Chaser, so there's only 29 days in Adar. Nevertheless, Kol Sha'ach V'Tainis Asr B'Hasim Mutter. When Rabbi Yossi was saying that afterwards it's also going to be Asr, but he only meant that it's Asr in Tainis, but not that it will be Asr in Hesped. So therefore, we wanted to say the first day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan is Asr. Why? Because we wanted to ensure that the day before be usher, not just in Hesped, but not just in Tainus, I'm sorry, but also in Hesped. So Zadim Rav Ashiyam, I feel Tam L'Chedesh Chaser. Even if we're talking about a Chedesh Chaser, meaning it's not a Malidik a month, right? The Adar only has 29 days. Nevertheless, Kol Sha'achar B'Tainus Aser Behesed Mutter. What will end up happening is the day after will be Aser just in Tainus, but Behesed will be Mutter. But then this special day of 29th day of Adar, because it's between the first day of Nisan holiday of the Carbon Tumid and the day after this holiday of beating the Romans and not having Torah be Aser. So Asuk Yontav Atzim, they made this day into a really special Yontav, Fil Behesped, Nami Aser. And even on Hesped, it's also going to be Aser. All right, we have to stop over here.